Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to another edition of This Week in Cleantech. You know it as a 15-minute roundup of the biggest stories in climate and clean energy each week. Today is Friday, September 5, 2025. We've got a special guest on the horn, Jennifer Hiller from the Wall Street Journal. Ever heard of it? She's joining us shortly. I am Factor This content director Paul Gerke, joined as always by Cleantech commentator Mike Casey of Tigercomm. Mike, it is nice to see you on this fine Friday, as it always is. What's new in your world?
You too, friend. We're going to be joining up next week to tape the show on Wednesday, 1:30 Las Vegas time at the Power Up stage.
I'm ready.
Baby.
I'm packing a suitcase. You should bring that thing that you sometimes have on the show that says no.
No.
There it is. You have it right now. Yeah, pack that. I don't know if it's a carry-on item or if it needs to go in the checked.
Well, I'm trying to get like 10 of these things. I can hand them out to our legions of fans. And they'll fit on, because we're flying Clarion's jet down there. Are you going to pick me up or am I picking you up? Who gets on the jet
I was
first?
going to just send a rope down, Mission Impossible style, and hope that you could army crawl your way up into the passenger hold. I don't know. We'll give it a spin.
That's the young me, not me. Hey, we have a listener shout out. Our first Kiwi, Trent Choisler, from New Zealand, says,
that's awesome.
we got a great show that's always entertaining, short and snappy. I don't know what he has to say about you, Paul, but
I put a dress shirt on for you. I mean, let's start there. All right, guys. We always appreciate that feedback.
Yeah.
We need to hear some of it at RE Plus if you're out there, by the way. Come find us on the stage if we're doing the show, or just send us a message. My email's paul.gerke@clarionevents.com. You can reach me there. Story number one this week, Mike, get us started.
Drum roll, Josh Siegel, Politico. In windy Iowa, a GOP lawmaker faces a reckoning over Trump's clean energy war, Paul.
Mike, we've been talking for quite some time about the Trump administration's disdain for renewables, but particularly for wind. If you read up on this dates back to a beef that the president had about a Scottish golf course that was in line of sight of a wind project decades ago. And just like his ongoing beef with Rosie O'Donnell, it is still front and center in his mind. And he is doing all he can to strain the wind economy here in the United States, whether he realizes it or not. Republican lawmakers are kind of caught in the crosshairs, though, here, Mike, because a lot of these wind projects are in rural red states where we have the room and the wind, quite frankly, for giant turbines. No Republican under greater fire, perhaps, than Iowa's Marionette Miller Meeks. If you haven't heard about Miller Meeks, supported an all-of-the-above energy strategy backing renewables and fossil fuels, but she cast a critical vote for the tax bill, which wiped out billions of dollars in wind economic incentives, the one known as the OBBB, despite her state getting nearly 2/3 of its electricity from wind power. So Iowa gets 2/3 of electricity from wind, but you're going to sign off on a strategy that helps get less wind onto the grid. Democrats now eyeing Miller Meeks' Southeast Iowa seat, which she held by only 799 votes, count them, last fall, even as Trump won the district by 8 points. Republicans trying to protect a slim House majority in next year's midterms among voter backlash over this budget bill. Mike, your thoughts about dampering the wind economy in those wind-heavy states?
I think in August, Representative Miller Meeks said that wind power works and that Iowa has proved that, but the next morning she said side by side with Energy Secretary Chris Wrong.
See what you did there?
Dude, awesome, right? As he argued that heavy federal spending on renewable energy is, quote, nonsensical. Even a contortionist could not stretch that far, and now the Congresswoman is in the find-out phase of her FAFO journey. So Iowa's power costs are among the lowest in the nation, and its grid is among the most stable. Yeah. Wind farms are the top taxpayer in 1/3 of Iowa's counties, providing 55% of property taxes and $91 million in lease payments to farm families to help them stay on the land. So an opposition poll in June showed that the Congresswoman was down by 4 points from her likely opponent next year. Just strictly from a play calling perspective, I will say this. I spent a lot of time in politics in a past life. And if she loses, in part because she vandalized the clean energy industry in her district, it will be the first time that has happened in American politics ever. And it's going to be interesting seeing how she fares, as well as Jen Kiggins for Virginia 2nd Congressional District. She has a robust solar industry in her district back home. She was one of the signers of the GOP House letter saying we will defend the industry. And then she was the casting the deciding vote and deciding to abandon it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to both these representatives. Paul, story number 2.
Story number 2, and first a caveat, is responsibility still a thing? Do people own up for stuff that they do? I don't know. We can check into that for you. We'll get Mendez on it. Story number 2, Gavin McGuire from Reuters. It's called "The Energy Transition is Now a National Security Issue. Just ask India." I'm going to ask Mike Casey. What's the national security issue here?
India, a tiny little country you may never have heard of. It relies on imports for nearly 90% of its crude oil supply. Has been buying a lot of that from Russia. We went from 100,000 barrels a day to 1.8 million barrels in just 3 years, from 21 to 24. So a lot of criticism around the globe because India is seen as propping up Putin's war machine. It creates a geopolitical risk for India. But when it comes to electricity, the story is different. India is a lot more self-reliant. 70% from domestic coal still, but now 30% of India's electricity is coming from clean energy. McGuire Woods notes that India's oil demand may look inflated because of artificially cheap Russian supplies and a recent slowdown in Chinese demand, but with China's oil growth slowing to 3%, growth in its consumption, attention has shifted to India as the next big driver of oil demand. It has a massive fleet of cars and scooters, which means their dependence on oil won't be going away anytime soon, but that growth in demand may look bigger than it really is. Paul?
I'm glad we're getting into these international, other side of the world topics, because this is an area I don't know as much about. This is really a learning sphere for me. McGuire argues that as hostility to those Russian imports grows, Mike, the refining sector looks increasingly vulnerable. And on the other side of that token, the clean power industry looks more attractive. It's less vulnerable to those sudden supply issues, the geopolitical conflicts over oil refineries. It also provides a steadier source of jobs and tax money over time. That's why India's future energy may prioritize its power sector rather than the oil refining industry specifically. The Indian government is already investing big in local solar manufacturing. A Solar Power Europe report stated that India is on track to double its manufacturing capacity of solar modules by 2030. I know India's Premier Energies has a deal with Helion here stateside up in Minnesota. McGuire concludes that geopolitical conflicts could push countries to shift to clean energy faster, since relying on domestic power sources may become essential for national security. Mike, story 3.
Alice Hancock, Malcolm Moore in the Financial Times, How Farming Inspired the EU's Affordable Energy Plan. This is a cool story, Paul.
Farming turns out really important. Growing food to eat and to make stuff with. The European Commission wants to cut costs and bring in cheap, clean energy to industries across the EU through 3-way contracts with, 1, industry, which promises to buy a set of amount of renewable electricity, 2, renewable developers, which promise to build the power plants to supply that energy, and 3, governments and financial institutions, which would promise regulatory certainty and incentives to ensure deals will work long term. The hope here, though, is that these contracts will ensure everyone works together to cut the uncertainty and improve that investment climate in Europe. Dan Jorgensen, the EU's energy commissioner, first proposed this idea back in February, estimated to cut the bloc's overall spending on fossil fuels by 130 billion euros. That's no chump change, Mike.
Yeah. So inspiration here came from agriculture. So last June, Copenhagen struck a deal with the agricultural industry and environmental groups to tax pollution from livestock, marking a world first. It's known as the Green Tripartite Agreement.
Bless you.
The goal was to balance protecting nature, cutting livestock pollution, and supporting growth in agriculture. Industry players think this will work if the Commission makes regular policy interventions such as speeding up approvals. Heavier industries in Europe argue that the deeper problem is that its electricity prices are linked to the most expensive marginal producer, often gas. And unless it changes, costs are going to stay high and they won't go anywhere, meaning they could fall on regular taxpayers or consumers in an already volatile political environment. Paul, our 4th story.
Story number 4, coming back stateside with this one, Tim Deschamps of TechCrunch. It's titled, Every Fusion Startup That's Raised Over $100 Million. Are there a lot of them, Mike?
We've covered some of Tim's prior reporting on this show. Fusion power used to be a science project, used to be something that Jules Verne wrote about, but it's recently shifted from being dismissed to actually a credible, promising technology. Now it's attracting real investor interest. The tech is still very expensive to build, and it's challenging to master. That's an understatement. However, if the startups are able to complete a commercially viable fusion power plant, then they got the potential to reshape a trillion-dollar market. The recent investments in fusion have been driven more by powerful computer chips, sophisticated AI, and powerful high-temperature superconducting magnets. These developments have led to a more sophisticated reactor design and control systems. Paul?
Mike, I don't want to call the anti-solar folks anti-solar bros, because the fossil fuel bro archetype is kind of its own thing. But I just want to note that the anti-fossil or the anti-renewable bros here always end up defaulting to, well, fusion. And then you say, well, maybe 10 years from now. But believe it or not, there's been a dirty dozen of these companies that have raised $100 million in recent years. Commonwealth Fusion Systems has raised about a third of all the private capital invested in those such companies to date, about $3 billion in its coffers. Talk to me in 10 years. But in the meantime, we got story number 5 and a special guest.
Yeah, man. Jennifer Hiller, Wall Street Journal. Welcome. We're really excited to have you on the show. You wrote this really interesting story. Data centers don't exist yet, are already haunting the grid. I think this is absolutely fascinating.
I love this.
And it gets to the heart of how unpredictable our energy future will be. So, Jennifer, let me start on a basic level. If people have not read the story, which we really want them to do, what is the big takeaway for readers?
That data centers and tech companies are making big requests of utilities and the grid in kind of astonishing amounts. And it's just very hard for people to figure out on the utility side of the world what's real and what's actually going on out there. Nobody really knows the level of demand. It appears to be a lot, but it's kind of this mystery number.
It's a mystery number that a lot of people want to throw other big mystery numbers at, I feel like, Jennifer, because it serves their own ends, whether it's the rate base or whether it's raising funds from investors. Do we have any idea how much the scaling of AI is really going to impact the amount of power that we're going to need to put on the grid?
That's such a great question. And, we see these kind of crazy ranges of how much additional electricity supplies are going to be needed. Of course, the grid is overbuilt by design. So you want to always have excess capacity. So you can kind of grow. You should always be able to grow, I guess, to some certain extent. And then you have to start building a lot. And there's just a lot of question about how much, kind of infrastructure on the transmission and distribution side needs to be built. And then, I think kind of a bigger question about, what sort of generation we're going to need to add.
Jennifer, it seems to me there are several factors at play that make predicting future energy demand really tough. I mean, this is like playing four-dimensional chess. One, does AI scale as fast as the evangelists assert? There's been this wave of, Chat 5.0 wasn't very good. See, it's not going to scale up. It's not going to be replacing as many humans. So number 2, will there be efficiencies in data use or in power use? And will that efficiency matter, or will it only spur heavier use? So those are 3 things that pop up pretty regularly on the stories that we cover here. So now comes this multiple counting problem that you've documented. And there might be somebody who's going to be high-fiving because they get the nod from you. But in your reporting, did you get a sense who has the most confident, realistic growth projection numbers that filter out this multiple counting that you documented in the story?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I don't actually know, because I don't know how rigorous the utilities are. And they all have kind of their way of ferreting out, who's a likely customer. And at all of the utilities, you have to go through, you're going through gates along the way. You don't just show up and say, hi, I want a gigawatt, and they start building infrastructure for you. There's all sorts of studies and service agreements, and you're paying money along the way. So at some point they kind of can figure out this is a company that's well capitalized or not. But yeah, and I think they've all gotten, I think, a little bit more stringent in how they view, I guess, what's likely to be built. 'Cause you can't just assume that everybody that's knocking on your door is going to come, because, and on the data center side, kind of in their defense, they don't know where they can go get electric service in sort of a reasonable amount of time. And so they kind of have to go look at a lot of different locations, because maybe you can get service somewhere in 2 to 3 years and it could be 7 years in another market. And it's hard to know exactly where they can go, and where all of your permits and things like that also have to fall into line. So it's kind of confusing for everybody to some extent.
Paul, I got one follow-up.
Go ahead, fire away.
One of the things I'm wondering is, I'm not a utility regulator or regulation
Wait, you're
wonk.
not? Why am I here then? Oh.
But integrated resource plans that utilities have to file, they have to do them every so many years, and they're years out in predictions. I've got to figure that most of the IRPs that have been approved by utility commissions, they almost predate all these questions. They predate all these factors that you're finding in your reporting. So is it reasonable to say that there are very few, if any, IRPs that are actually accounting for all this difficult counting?
I think some of the more recent IRPs that I've seen, do sort of get into this, issue of like data centers specifically, and what kind of growth they are expecting from that, sort of business group in particular. But yeah, I think like your IRP can become outdated much faster right now than, it would have been probably fine, to be looking at it every 3 to 5 years before. And you definitely get the sense that they are just having to kind of look at this almost constantly, within the utilities. Like, just 6 months ago or a year ago isn't, relevant anymore to the kind of requests that they're seeing. So it's a really tricky thing to figure out for, long-term planning, because these are, as these are really long-lived assets. So they've got, it's a lot for them and their regulators to sort through.
All right, Mikey, let's wrap it up. We're running out of time. Go to the Cleantecher of the week. You got an easy name for me this week. I appreciate that. I'm really familiar with the first half. It's Paul Riley, CEO of Lululemon-backed recycling startup Samsara Eco. This company's technology uses AI to break down even the toughest to recycle materials with enzymes, allowing waste to be converted into resins and made into new products. Congratulations, Paul, our Cleantecher of the week this week.
Totally cool technology.
Very cool.
Just absolutely
enzymes,
love that.
Man.
Yeah, man. We want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, Claire Quirin, and Alex Peter for gathering these stories.
Yeah, you guys are great, as always. Really appreciate what you add to the show. And same to you, Jennifer Hiller, for joining us this week in Cleantech. If you like the show, please subscribe. Leave us a little feedback, share story suggestions. Do whatever you want. We're not your boss. You can read all the articles we discussed this week by clicking the links in the episode description in the post on Factor This.
I'll see you on the private jet, Paul.
We'll see you at RE Plus, folks. Come say hi.
Take care. Bye.